Oh, that was great. I mean, this afternoon is really turning out to be quite an amazing event. I tell you, I didn't think we could top the morning, but I think we may have. What do you guys think? So I'm pretty excited because I have the privilege to introduce the man who started it all, the man who founded this company 30 years ago at a kitchen table. And over the past 3 decades, Scott has experienced all kinds of struggles, hardships, and moments of elation, just like many of you who are trying to build your businesses, take them to the next level, achieve the American dream, leave a legacy for your children and your grandchildren, something for them to be proud of. And he knows what you're going through. He's walked in your shoes. And he is a man who is still at it after 30 years. He serves as the chairman of the executive committee. Scott works at the company every day and continues to be the heartbeat of an entrepreneurial mindset at Intuit. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the founder, Mr. Scott Cook.
Thank you, Bill. Let me start by describing why I come to work every day. And why does most of Intuit's 8,000 staff, why they get out of bed in the morning? Well, it's the coffee, but after the coffee. I know from my experience, when you are part of a founding team of a small business, that the business becomes you. And maybe it shouldn't, but it becomes key to your self-perception, the perception of others about you, perception of your customers, your employees, your spouse, your in-laws. When it's working, it's one of the great highs in life. And when it's not working, it's one of the great lows. So why do we get out of bed in the morning? It's small business success. The success of the small business economy and the heroes of the small business economy, the developers, the accountants, the advisors. Now, I measure my success by the emotion of our customers. The joy of landing a new customer because of the delighted word of mouth from an existing customer. The warmth of being home at night because the small business work got done so our customer could be home with their kids. The ambition to expand the business, the energizingness that comes from adopting some new technology or solution that just aces a problem in your business. The excitement of finding a new idea to use in your business to make it even better. Those are the emotions of how I measure success. Just one quick story. Since we launched QuickBooks Financing, we started getting a special kind of comment or testimonial from some customers. A theme, one guy wrote in, it's representative theme, he said, I needed money for my business to expand and even to stay in business. I got turned down by my bank. We were faced with going out of business. But thanks to QuickBooks Financing, the business is here and the jobs are with it. Thank you. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. That's why I come to work. There's something really big that we're all working on. And that's the measure of success that I take personally. So with that, let me introduce the man who I'll interview in a fireside chat for the next 20 minutes. Marc Andreesen literally, as a college student, ignited the internet revolution when, as a student, he wrote the first modern browser that caused the web to take off. And that's Marc in 1996. He now wears shoes. He then, through a succession of companies, well, then he started Netscape, which was for a while the fastest growing company on the planet. Then through a succession of other companies, then as an investor and board member, mentor for some of the most interesting companies on the planet. I've had the joy for 6 years of being on a board with Marc, and I really think Wired magazine nailed it in their recent cover of Marc, which we'll see on the screen. He really is the man who makes the future. Let me introduce Marc Andreesen. Now, Marc's doing us a great favor. He's been sick this week, hasn't gone into work, but wanted to make sure that he made this. So thank you.
No, this is a really good... This is a great opportunity for me. I'm on so many drugs that I'm not responsible for anything I'm about to say. So just check my Twitter account later today to see what I have to disavow. It'll all be good.
Okay, let's start. Well, let's start talking about large companies. Large companies seem to have so much money and people and distribution and brand. Should smaller businesses be daunted competing against the big guys?
So, you know, my day job, so I'm a venture capitalist, so my day job is funding small companies that kind of by definition all have the aspiration that they're going to go up against the big giants, the big gorillas. And so this is a topic that we think about all the time. I think we're at a really, really interesting turning point. One of the reasons I wanted to come today is because I think we're at a very interesting turning point in the business world around how companies use technology. And I think it roughly works like this, which is, you know, the computer really kind of hit business in a major way, you know, about 30 years ago. And for the last 30 years, big companies have had a huge advantage over smaller companies because of just size and mass and scale, right? So big companies have these big information technology teams. You know, some of the big manufacturing companies or big banks might have 50,000 people in their IT organization to use technology, and they've got these huge budgets. Some of these companies spend $10 billion a year on computers and software, and you know that's all fine and good. And then you're a small business. You know, you run your own company, or you run a small business, and you've got yourself, and you've got maybe your nephew, and you've got your maybe a neighbor who's a consultant, and you kind of cobble together what you can, and you use the great software that Intuit makes, but you know, you look at what these big companies can do with their websites and their mobile apps and everything, and you think, wow, how can I compete with that? So we think there's a pivot happening right now where because of the web and because of cloud and mobile and this new phenomenon of software as a service, we think things are shifting rapidly. And in fact, we think that many of the new business applications that are delivered online, delivered on the internet, are much more easier to use, much easier to adopt than all the old stuff made by companies like IBM and Oracle that all the big companies use. And we think that we're shifting into an era now where small businesses are going to be able to use technology much more aggressively, be much more nimble. And just think about it this way: is you can go today online and you can go to Salesforce.com and you can click and have your CRM system, or you go to HubSpot and have your marketing system. You can go to we just launched a company called Switch. You go online and you click and you have a complete business phone system entirely in the cloud linked to your mobile phones. And you can just adopt this stuff overnight. Big company, imagine the planning meeting that they have to begin the conversation, right? Which, you know, the 25 people get in the room at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and they spend the first half hour introducing themselves to each other because they've never met before. And then that's the planning meeting for the pre-meeting, you know, which then involves the scheduling process to get to the actual meeting, which will happen in 6 months, you know, which will involve everybody flying to a resort in Thailand. Like, the whole thing you know, is just so elaborate. These big companies are now so large. And so we think that really the arrival of the internet in a major way for business is really shifting power towards small businesses.
Cool, cool. Okay, so we've got close to 4,000 small business owners, partners, leaders. There was a book a while back, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You've worked with some of the most exciting companies on the planet: Facebook, Instagram, Lyft. Help me with a couple.
Airbnb.
Airbnb. So you get to see a lot of great CEOs. What would you say are the habits of great CEOs?
So we've really pulled out four that I want to highlight today. So I'll go through them relatively quickly. So the first one is the great CEOs seem to be good at both strategy and tactics. So they seem to be very good at the big picture, and they're also good at the details. And that sounds kind of obvious. It sounds kind of obvious that you'd have to be good at both of those. But I will tell you, most of the people we see and most of the people we deal with, and I think most of the people in life, at best are good at one or the other. And as you probably go around and you know people who run businesses, it's like, you kind of say that person is really good at the big picture, but the details are just, always a complete mess. Or that person is really good at the details, but he's just going to, execute against the details until the business goes under. There's no big picture kind of approach. And so the really, really good CEOs seem to be really uniquely good at both. So that's the first one I'd highlight. Second thing I'd highlight is what I call tilting into problems. The really good CEOs, you can see it in their eyes. When there's a problem in the business, they immediately go fix it, right? There is no air gap, as they say, kind of between the identification of the problem and then diving in to fix the problem. And you can see it in the body language. It's actually very funny. You can see it in the body language. The really good CEOs get the fire, the minute there's a problem, they get the fire in their eyes, and they just go straight into it and try to fix it. The CEOs who are going to end up having trouble, you get a completely different reaction. You get the deep sigh, right? You get the right, and then they have to kind of gin up the emotional energy to go try to deal with the people and fix the problem. So that's a big one, and that's a kind of thing where it compounds over time, right? That's not just a one-time thing. It's something that you see people do 1,000 times or 10,000 times in the course of a business, and it really matters. The third one is the really great CEOs are very honest with their employees, and they're very honest with themselves. And in particular, they're very honest about the things that aren't going well. Right, and the reality of any business is there's always any number of things that are not going well, right? Every CEO always projects to the outside world that everything is great. It's like in the Lego movie, it's like the theme song was everything is awesome. And every CEO kind of feels this responsibility to always kind of be on and kind of say, yeah, everything's great. And then you talk to your employees, like, everything's great. And your employees are like, no, like stuff's all screwed up. And if the CEO continues to insist that everything is great, the employees aren't fooled, right? The CEO can't convince the employees that the things that are screwed up aren't screwed up. And so the CEOs that build credibility over time, I think, do it by being very honest with their employees and saying that is screwed up and we are going to fix it. And then they're also honest with themselves, which is equally important. And then the fourth, and then the one we deal with in the Valley that really seems to make a huge amount of difference is the great CEOs know when to change the plan, but they also know when to stick to the plan. And in Silicon Valley right now, there's this concept that has sort of emerged called the pivot, which in the old days we used to call the screw up. But now we have the fancy term for it. And the reason we have the fancy term for it is in the old days, if you screwed up, you felt bad, and you would do something different. Now you just proudly proclaim, everything is wonderful. You're pivoting. And so, in the extreme case, you may know some of these people, you may read about these people, is in the extreme case, they'll basically take credit for how many times they pivoted, right, without ever actually succeeding, which just gets odd after a while. On the other hand, you don't want a CEO who's going to just keep bashing their head against the wall or keep bashing a business's head against the wall forever while it doesn't work. And so there's some dynamic in between knowing when to change and knowing when to persist that is really, really important. And the problem with that one is I don't think there's a rule book. Like, we've attempted to figure out what the common patterns are, and I don't think there is one. I think that's when the CEO really earns the salary, is when they make the decision of when to stay on the plan and then when to change the plan.
Let me follow up on that last one. So you've been attempting to find the Rosetta Stone for when to change versus when to stay on the plan. Yeah. What are some of the patterns you're seeing that might be helpful to those in the audience who are confronting that decision in their own business?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Thank you for asking the question that I said would be the hard one to answer. That is a very, very difficult thing to say.
Get paid to do.
Yes. So I think it's very, very specific to the details. One of the reasons why we haven't been able to find the pattern is because I think it's very specific to the details of the business. And one of the things that here's another thing we believe is the great CEOs have an intuitive sense of what to do. And they have an intuitive sense of what to do, not because they just trust their gut or because they think that they have good instincts or whatever. They have an intuitive sense of what they do because great CEOs are so embedded into their business. Great CEOs live and breathe their business. And they're so embedded into the customer, they talk to the customers all the time, and they know the employees inside out, and they know the competitive landscape, and they know the market trends. you just, as a CEO, you just swim in your business all day long. And so you kind of develop this kind of gut level understanding of what's happening based on thousands and thousands of data points that are coming in. So we almost always defer to the gut instinct of the CEO in a situation like that. I will say there is something that I have come to appreciate more and more. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin, and we are stubborn people where I come from. We don't give up easily.
Winter will do that.
The Wisconsin winter will make you extremely stubborn. And so my inclination always is to never give up. Like I just hate giving up. There's a famous book on strategy, right, called The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and he says this thing in the book. He says, I forget the exact wording, but the message is an army has to win. You actually can't have an army that goes, and he says, like, I don't know, he gives some number, it's like 12 months or 18 months if it's like a military army, but the same thing applies in a business is you can't have a business that's not working for, let's call it, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. At some point, demoralization just sets in. And we see this a lot in the Valley. We see very well-meaning people running companies where it's just not working. And 3 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, they're still trying and they're still trying and they come in to raise money and you can just feel the spirit of the company is slipping away. And so I do think there is a virtue to this idea of the pivot, which is you don't want the army, you don't want the company, the metaphorical army, to go after a plan that's not working for too long. But on the other hand, a very large number of business successes have been things that didn't work up front that later became, sort of the proverbial overnight success. And so there's a real tension in that question.
I know that from experience.
Yes.
Let me ask, on advice and seeking advice, a lucky few firms will get the advice from you or your partners. But there are thousands of firms here who won't have that luck. What would be your guidance to leaders of companies on advice? How to seek, from whom?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. So I would say one is, my experience is, even when I was sort of earlier in my career, my experience was you'd be surprised how many people love to give advice. Very few people wake up in the morning and they're like, God, I hope nobody asks me what I think. Right? Like, that doesn't generally happen. Most people go through life saying, boy, I have all this experience, I've learned all these lessons, why don't more people ask me what I think? And so I think that, I think more people are open to it, more people around you and more people that you run into are open to it than you would think. And then the other thing is that's now becoming, it used to be this would be something you do in person. More and more people are giving, there's a lot of stuff happening on the internet, and in particular on Twitter these days. There's a very, kind of thriving ecosystem of people who run businesses, are investors, and there's just, or on blogs, there's just tremendous amounts of online engagement. There are websites like Quora where people ask questions and get answers from experts. And so I think people are generally more amenable to this than a lot of people assume. And so I would say always ask. But then the other thing I would say is it's very important not to take any individual's advice as gospel. And the person I read a book on President Clinton at one point, and he was sort of famous among his staff in that he would ask everybody he would ever run into for their thoughts on every topic, and it would drive his key advisors absolutely crazy because he would come back from some meeting or some event and he'd have some new idea based on something that somebody told him, and it would drive them crazy because they were supposed to be in charge, right, of what he thought. And he would just have these, he would like stay up in the middle of the night and he would like dial people who he had known like 20 or 30 years ago on the phone and ask for their advice. And what he would do is he would composite together he would get the advice from as many sources as possible and composite it together to stay, very intellectually nimble and not get locked into just what one person said. And so that generally is the path. As I generally tell people is whoever your current advisors are, probably don't spend more time with them. Probably go get 3 or 5 or 10 more, and then basically keep building. There's the old concept of the kitchen cabinet in politics. Basically, keep building the kitchen cabinet of the people who you can talk to.
You mentioned Twitter. What should a small business or any size business owner or leader read today?
So I really think. I'll give a direct answer to the question, but I want to set up first. So I really think, as I said earlier, in terms of how businesses use technology, I think the internet is a huge lever that smaller businesses can use against larger businesses. And there's a lot of ways that technology can be used in business. In particular, the internet is a way to do marketing and to do customer acquisition, I think is still underexploited. And in particular, these new channels like Facebook and Twitter. And then the next one that's coming, Pinterest is in the process of rolling out their marketing programs. And I think businesses are going to be absolutely shocked. I think, we're an investor, so I'm biased, but I think it's going to be an incredibly effective way for businesses to be able to acquire customers interested in all kinds of products and goods and services. And so if I were running a small business, I would really focus hard on the ability to use the internet as a lever sort of into the market. The website I think that's the most kind of underappreciated on that is the website's called Search Engine Land. And it's a famous guy who's been in the Valley for about 15 years, Danny Sullivan, who sort of covers the ins and outs of using all these new online channels. And it's basically this how-to guide, and he's completely current. And it's called Search Engine Land because it kind of came, he named it back when Google was the big thing, which of course it still is. But he also covers Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and all these new channels. And I think that's probably the single biggest kind of underexploited resource. And then I think the other I mentioned is I think Twitter itself. The number of people who actually know what they're talking about on Twitter, who are volunteering all kinds of interesting things, is actually pretty profound at this point.
You're on Twitter.
Well, I'm on Twitter, but, present company excluded. But I follow, I actually have a list. If you go to my Twitter account, I have a list called Industry, and I follow like 600 people who I think are just absolutely genius, like in the tech industry in our business. And so you're certainly welcome to look at that. But also, just more generally, a lot of smart people now are on Twitter. And one of the fun things you can do on Twitter is you can look at you can find somebody you admire on Twitter, and then you can find out who they follow, right? And so you can see who they respect and who they're listening to. And if you spend an hour or two looking at the profiles of people you respect and then looking at the list of the people they respect, you basically get this coverage of a very large number of very smart people. And I think it's an incredible resource that people are still not taking seriously enough.
Let's talk the concept of product market fit. You've described there's two phases in a business life in general. One before product market fit, the second is after. Yeah. Let's pick one of those two and talk about what you mean and what the issue has to be on the leader's mind.
Yeah. So let me describe, we use this term a lot, product market fit. So let me describe what I mean by that. And sort of the way to think about it is it's actually a feeling more than anything else. It's actually not numbers. It's something that you feel in a business. And everybody in the audience has probably been through both sides of this at different points. So there's what we call pre-product market fit. So that's basically when you've got the product and it's out there and you're taking it to market, but the market's not pulling it, right? It feels like you're pushing the product into the market. And the metaphor that we use is it feels like you're pushing on a rope. Mm-hmm. You're out and you're telling people you've opened the new restaurant or you've opened the new firm or you've done whatever, you've got the new product. And you're evangelizing and you're trying to get people to understand it and you're trying to figure out how to get customers, but it's just not quite taking. Right? And if you talk, a lot of business owners are very familiar. You get that feeling in your gut of like, boy, like, are people really going to want what I built? I'm selling some, but I'm not selling, what I should be selling. So that's pre-product market fit. And then there's what's called post-product market fit, which is the good one, which is the one where the market's pulling the product out of the company, right? And that's the one where you show up in the morning and like you start to have the other problem, which is you have too much business, right? You have the very high quality problem of too many people want what you have, and so if you're a service provider, you're overbooked, or you're late to every engagement, or if you're a product company, you're out of inventory and you're trying to scrambling to try to figure out how to fulfill demand, or if you're a hiring manager, you're trying to figure out how you can't hire people fast enough, or phone calls aren't being answered, and so that's the high quality problem. Our recommendation always is pre-product market fit. It almost doesn't matter what else you optimize in your business. The big thing that really matters at that point is figuring out how to get to product market fit. So just obsessing on the details of the product and the market, the target customers, who are the target customers exactly, what's the way to reach them. Like the key challenge for the business is to really get into the specifics of how to get the product market fit puzzle put together. And then kind of the sort of rest of the things that you optimize in a business aren't as important. When you have product market fit, all of a sudden everything else becomes important, right? Are the customers happy, right? Are the employees, is the company well managed? Is it efficient? Is it making money? All these other things immediately start to kick in. And our recommendation, our view is CEOs should be very aware of which side of that divide they're on, and run the company very differently based on which side they're on.
And that's been our experience. Every one of our really successful businesses gets crafted to a point where suddenly it takes off on word of mouth. And no longer are you pushing on the rope. People, delighted customers are pulling. And that's the engine of growth in the kinds of businesses that, and trying to get to our favorite contractor, to do stuff on our house has the same thing. He's booked by happy customers and the word of mouth. So it's, I think, universal. It can be scary at times in a small business. Talk about the mindset of the entrepreneur when things aren't going well. How do you not only survive but then triumph? What does it take in the mind of the leader to make that happen?
Yeah, so we call this the emotional roller coaster, and you alluded to this before I came out, which is it is amazing when you're running a company, and there must be other jobs where this is the case, but it's definitely the case for CEOs, where there are moments when you just feel like the world is caving in, and it literally feels like you can't take another piece of bad news. Like there were times I've had businesses where there were times when like literally I just did not want to check my email in the morning. Like I didn't even care what was in it. I could not take one more piece of bad news. And then there are other times in which like everything just like clicks and everything goes, and you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And then you immediately panic because you're like, okay, what's going to go wrong, and cause it to come all crashing down. And of course, the nature of the CEO job is that if you're the CEO, that's your internal feeling. And the problem is you can't really talk to your employees about it because they're under pressure, but they're not under the same pressure, and then it's very hard. If the CEO comes in, if the CEO uses their employee as a therapist, like it's a bad internal dynamic. So you can't really talk to your CEO, and then of course what a lot of CEOs do is, who else are you going to talk to who you really trust? Well, you go home and talk to your spouse, and then the problem is like you're taking
the brother-in-law.
Well, and then you're projecting all of your anxieties in your personal relationships, and you really start to pollute those relationships. So I think this is the big. This is the reason we always say starting a company or running a company is actually it's an irrational act. Like the reality is like all this press coverage always the CEOs make all this money and whatever. Like the reality is it's probably not worth the money, right? It's just the anxiety level. The fact it's just like yes, CEO, how'd you sleep last night? Oh, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried, right? Like, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. And it's like it's probably not actually worth it, but you're driven by your mission and what you're trying to build, and so you do it. And so that is life. And so I guess I would say one is it's completely normal. That's what everybody goes through. I have not yet met a CEO who has said to me, in private, no, I'm great. I'm great. Everything's fine. I'm calm. They all say it's the roller coaster. The other recommendation we make to our CEOs is something that I think could be done much more broadly is, so in the big company world, they have this thing called the Young Presidents Organization, or called YPO. And some of you may be involved in this. And it's,
well, I'm no longer Y. But
Y, yes. So which one are you in now?
Oh, they have a successor organization for graduates.
Yeah.
They should call it the Old Presidents Organization.
OPO? Yeah.
OPO, but their euphemism. World Presidents Organization.
WPO, okay.
Yeah.
WISE Presidents.
WISE, there
WISE
you go.
Presidents Organization. And so the YPO is this very clever thing where it'll be a group. How many people are in a group in the YPO?
It's divided into chapters, but then into forums, which are typically about 8 to 12.
Yeah. So you take 8 to 12 people, and there are 8 to 12 people who are running companies, presidents or CEOs who are running companies. And basically there's a rule, right, which is everything is confidential. And so it's like, this is the confidential zone. Nothing that is said in this group is going to get repeated outside the group. And then when you get a group like that together, and by the way, they don't need to all be in the same business or even in the same size company. It's just they're all in that position of responsibility where they have other people relying on them, because they're running a company. And then everything is confidential. And then what we found is it's the one opportunity for a CEO to be able to really go and unburden themselves and say, I am facing these problems and I need help, and to be able to get help from their peers. Yeah. And what we found is there's the formal organizations, and then we have a bunch of entrepreneurs who have organized themselves into these groups just informally, and they get together for dinner once a month, and they consistently report that it's the single best thing they do because they can really rely on each other. And so I would really highly recommend that.
Yeah. Just one quick close then, and I would recommend that as well. It's been very helpful to me. Quick closing thought. Today opened with Brad describing some of the larger role of small business in the national economy. Yeah. How do you see that?
Yeah, so this I think is really powerful. So we're in a phase now, we're in a sort of a phase of the economic cycle where there's a fair amount of negative publicity around businesses, and sometimes you pick up the paper and it seems like all business people are bad. So this really interesting survey just came out this week from an organization, a research group called Pew, which is very highly regarded. And they did a global survey with the following question, which is, do you think that ordinary people are better off under capitalism, under the free market system, or under alternative systems? And they did it across countries for all citizens. And the numbers came back for sort of Western European countries, Central and South American countries, 40s to 50s to 60%. United States, generally very capitalist country, came in at 70%. The really striking one was Vietnam, came in at 95%, right? And so if you think about what that means, 95% of Vietnamese think that capitalist system is the best way for ordinary people to be able to make progress in their lives. They know because they lived the alternative for 35 years. They ran the other experiment. It was horrible. And they are, as a consequence of that, full throttle into a capitalist renaissance that's just absolutely extraordinary, and they completely understand it. And I think there's a very, very powerful message in there. I've always been a believer that capitalism and that running a business is an incredibly moral thing, an incredibly positive thing. And I think about it, I'll just close, and I think about it as a quadruple win. Like when it's done right and when it works, it's a quadruple win. You're serving your customers, right? You're giving your customers something that they want and that they need and that they value, which is I think, a more morally virtuous thing to do. You're serving your employees because you're providing for them, providing for their families, giving them the ability to build a better life for themselves. You're providing for your family, and you're able to take care of your family, you're able to take care of your kids, you're able to take care of your relatives and so forth, which is incredibly powerful. And then, and it's unfashionable to say this as well, but then you pay taxes. You generate a profit, you pay taxes in service of your community, and you help support people throughout your community through that. And so I think it's an incredibly positive, virtuous cycle when it works. I think it works incredibly well. I think it has enormous potential, and I think everybody here plays a huge part in that.
Join me in thanking Marc Andreesen. Thank you. Right on.